So largely the assets I'm going to be using in this tutorial are going to be mega scans. Now I do want to put a little disclaimer at the front here. If you don't have mega scans, you can get it for free. If you download the bridge and you try and sign in, it'll ask you to sign in with Epic Games. And if you download Unreal Engine and get an Unreal Engine license, which is free, and have it installed, it's about 30 gigabyte, which is a bit annoying, but it gets you mega scans for free. Most of you probably knew that. Some of you probably already have it, but just in case you don't have access to the kind of main components of what I'm going to be using for this tutorial, there is an easy way to obtain it. I'm going to be using a lot of these kind of rock assets. One of the ones I used in the renders I did before was this rock, which I liked a lot. And you can use any, it kind of depends what kind of result you want. I think I will use a new one to just kind of let you see my process and approach something completely new. And I used a lot of these fern assets as well as the arrowhead plant. But you can really use whatever you want to get the look you want. Anyhow, I don't know what rock I'm going to use. I will probably find a new one. Okay, so I'm just going to go to nature, rock, have a look around. You see, when I look at a lot of these, you see these ones that have a lot of round edges. I'm sure they look okay, but I really like ones that have these kind of sharp edges like that, because when it comes to lighting, you can kind of do a bit of a crawl and have one side dark and one side light, and I don't know, I think it just ends up a little bit more striking as opposed to something super round and boring. These ones are cool. I was using some of the ones also that had that you were more kind of ground assets as opposed to a rock, and then just angling it good enough that you couldn't really tell. Okay, this one's cool. Or in fact, I like that. So I'm currently finding myself very captivated by this giant square, but I don't quite know if I'm going to use that. I think something super kind of dagger-like always makes for a cool render. So I'll probably actually go with this. It's got hard edges and it's super long. So that asset is called Small Rock, which is clearly a very unique and individual name, which I'm sure you'll be able to find super easy. You're going to want to make sure your render engine is set to Octane Renderer up here in the render settings. Otherwise, Bridge won't load in the Octane materials, and you don't really want to waste time doing that. So if you do that in the Bridge settings, that will fix that. And then when you've downloaded it, you can just hit export there, and it'll export to Cinema 4D. You go to Cinema, and it's magically there. Okay, so once you've got your very small rock, or whatever rock you chose to pursue this tutorial with, typical me, my kind of minimalist visual style, just gonna drop in a camera at like 80mm, zero out the rotation parameters, the X and Y. It's just something that's just kind of a staple in my workflow, and for what I do. I like to create very kind of almost portrait-like images. Now I think one thing I've been aware of in previous tutorials is I've definitely been quite bad at tailoring to the very, 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 very new comers to Cinema 4D, the 3D world. Maybe not completely being the kind of person that elaborates on switching between tools and shortcuts and what I'm pressing. I think that's something I will try and make time for. Although I think it's kind of redundant to break things down in each tutorial. It would be nice to create. And there already is places to learn those things. Anyway, once everything's centered, I'm going to scale this rock up a lot. And I'm actually just going to match it to the size of a cube. So if you drop in a cube and then, zoom out there, and I'm going to scale up the rock till it's like bumping the edges there of the cube. And then I'm going to push back a bit more, and I'm going to come into the render settings and switch to a square frame. I'm going to do 3000 by 3000. A lot of that's to kind of combat the compression of YouTube. I would maybe suggest doing 1080 by 1080, something, or 248, 248. And I just did Shift V then I'm just going to bring up the opacity of the view. Now I'm on R20, but whatever version of cinema you're on, that might look a little bit different, especially in like, I think after R23 this starts to look different. Now here's the kind of slight time consuming part of the tutorial that I might end up skipping through. So I'm going to boot up Octane and just latch it onto the left here, kind of simulating a good position for the rock to sit in is something I definitely spent probably a bit too much time on. I'll bring my camera back in a little bit there, but I actually like where it's kind of at now. But when it comes to kind of choosing our lights, and if I press W to recenter the axis there, it can definitely take a little bit of playing with to get an angle you like. So I'm going to set up our render settings here. I'm going to drop this to 248. You're hitting tab to cycle through. I'm going to do 8, 8, whack down to GA clamp and do 10. And you can pause that and take them in if you need to. Not really going to change anything else as of right now. Now I'm going to set up lighting. So I'm going to do some classic softbox lighting. I'm going to press F2, or you can hit up here on the right and get all these views out. But F2 gets you to the top view. And you go to cameras and switch to perspective. Now I can dart around while the live viewer stays in one place. So I'm going to make this plane about 4,000 by 4,000. I'm going to drop it down. And then holding shift on the bend deformer. And then we're going to grab the plane again and hold alt on the subdivision surface. And then I'm going to hit the bend at 90 degrees. I'm going to grab the rotation tool and I'm going to push it 90 this way. And then I'm going to push it 90 this way. Holding shift to snap there. And then I'm going to drop it down massively, just to get that kind of sharp bend going through there. And I'm going to pause the viewer because it's slowing down my viewport. And then I'm going to increase the size of the bend as well. Bring it down more. Now I'm actually just thinking when it comes to 248 by 248. Then I'll start that back up again. Now, if you drop in an area light, and this will be under animation tags in newer versions of Cinema. If we go to target the rock, come back to this F2 view we set up, I'm gonna push a light all the way out here. Now you'll notice it's not really doing anything, the light's not doing much. So if you come to objects and texture environment and you black this out completely, now we're actually going to get some shadows being caused because the sky is black. What we can do now is play with this light. Now, if you add a Octane camera tag, we enable the camera imager, turn highlight compression all the way up, that's going to get rid of this kind of like nasty highlight that happens without you having to mess with exposure and gamma. And if you come into the light tag, I'm going to change it to 1,000, and in the distribution, add in a fall of map and go into that and set it to 90 degrees. And then I'm going to have to push the light way further back. Okay, so I'm going to call this our basic scene setup for now, without kind of playing with the lighting too much. I would just call this a position to move forward. So now I'm going to work on the texture of the rock. You might like this kind of default look. I'm not massively keen on it, so I'm going to kind of just do some slight alterations that's going to make the light hit it a little bit nicer. And then I'm going to kind of play with the lights and make the rock look good on its own before I add any foliage. So if you're kind of only here to see how I scatter the foliage and what assets I use, the chapters will be timestamped so you can see all that. And I probably should apologize now, since my last tutorial. I do have a IQ Unix mechanical keyboard. Really sorry for the clicking, but I'm also not sorry. And if you complain about it, I'm going to ban you from my tutorials. So I'm just kind of laying out the material that comes with it here. If the displacement's not already turned on, you go to basic, just like I did there, turn it on. I'm going to bump this up to 4K for now, and the displacement. And sometimes I kind of push it a little bit, but often if you push it too much, you just start breaking the rock, really. So I would really kind of keep it around the values it's set at. Okay, now the main thing I'm really going to change is the color. So if you bump the gamma up, kind of bring out some of the darker areas, and then bring down the saturation, and bring the gamma up a little bit more, maybe. See what the hue can do. So I might leave that kind of quite close to where it is. I'm going to bring my saturation down to like 0.6 until we get like more of a grey rock. I just prefer that look, you might not. Whatever floats your boat, mate. But now I'm going to come into the color correction that's attached to the roughness. And I'm going to start playing with that a little bit too, because that kind of affects the shine you get across the rock, which does affect the way the light's going to hit it. So I'm going to pop out of that quickly. You don't have to do much work on the texture, but I'm going to make the light a bit more aggressive. Just kind of mess with it in a couple of different angles and situations. And then I'm going to duplicate the rock holding control. I'm going to turn off the first one. Mess with this at some different angles, because that looks nice. Can maybe do a couple different things with this. Like I said, I don't think, it's very hard when you're recording a tutorial to say, I'm going to set up the position and then leave it and never come back. I'm going to set up the lighting and cement that and never come back to it, because in these workflows in 3D, you're constantly darting back and forth. You can't lay out that process like that. So it is hard for me to kind of section it off, but I do it the best I can. And I'm in a really undestructive way, but also a slight messy way. I'm going to kind of keep saving the rotations that I like. And, you can always come back to them. Because with these kind of things, sometimes you can push it to a place that you just never quite get back to if you don't save it. So I like to kind of do that. And I think I would like this angle if I wasn't going to put foliage on it. Okay, maybe I'll go with something like this. Maybe straighten it up. How similar is that to the original? Okay, quite different. Now this is nice. We got one light and it looks great. I might play with this a little bit more. And I'm sorry, just before you can end up hearing this guy, I'm going to turn him off. No, wrong one. Because he's getting really loud. Okay, sorry, I had to wait a second for my GPU to quieten down. I don't really want to risk the whole recording getting this 3080 screaming in the background. I don't know how much I'd want to change the lighting. I think it is good to set up the lighting preliminarily. I think it is good to set up the lighting first, because kind of any lighting you're going to make look good on a rock on its own is going to look quite nice when you add foliage and whatever details you kind of want to add. Something that's interesting, you may have seen me use this trick before, so you set your light power to 10,000 and then come into the Cinema 4D details, maybe do like 50 by 50. You can start pushing really, really sharp shadows. Now, you can see kind of the effects now of when I made this glossy, and I don't know, I kind of feel like I probably made it a little bit too glossy. I feel like I probably made it a little bit too glossy, but just like kind of an example of how your light source is going to affect that. Maybe come back a bit. It's definitely nice. It allows you to get more of these sharp shadows over stuff that's just kind of a bit softer. You can always kind of go in between as well. I'm going to go for something like this. And then with the background, depending how kind of close you want this, you can get a little bit of backlighting pushing up onto it. Or you can just kind of push that away and leave them in space, which I think is what I'm going to go with now. Now I'm going to section our scene off a little bit here in the Objects Manager. So Alt-G, I'm going to group this. I'm going to call this Lights. I'm going to call this BG. I'm going to create a folder for cameras. I'm going to pop this sky in the Lights folder. And I'm going to group all of these. Call it Geo. And then group all of these. I'm going to call it Rocks. And then I'm just going to do 01, 02, and 03. And then save our scene. And in the camera, I'm going to mess with a couple different camera angles. Maybe do 150. And another thing I nearly always do in most of my renders, and a lot of my outputs in the renders that would have got you to click on this tutorial would have been done with 300, because I'm just a bit of a maniac like that. But the way this rock looks, I think I want the depth of 150. Okay. So now I think we're in a position to start setting up this foliage with the Octane scatters. So we'll move on to that. I think this kind of concludes the lighting and scene setup. I probably won't change this now. Maybe I'll flicker a light or two. Maybe darken the shadows here, or lighten it up more. Again, like I said, it's kind of hard to know ahead of time where your mind is going to go. But I think this is a good place to begin with. Okay, so at this stage, we're going to start adding little pieces of foliage. And I think this tutorial is kind of in some sort of duality. I think there's probably a good level of kind of knowledge and insight and composition just in setting up the way this rock looks. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to try and make it look more like one of the first ones I did, which was kind of built of about 4 or 5 different Octane scatters. And we have to do that. We have to kind of separate the scatters to build variation. And I think it's also a kind of workflow that can become confusing quickly. And as we come back around and unite it towards the end with kind of parental universal controllers that control all the scatters at once with one effector, or 2 or 3 different fields within that, it can be quite eye-opening if you've not took that kind of angle and things before. So we'll definitely rush into that. I think when I paused the recording, because I record these in segments, I had just like played with another angle, which I liked the look of. And now if you do excuse me again, this is kind of the difficult part of tutorials. I'm just going to change 1 or 2 things that I think would make it look better. I'm going to darken it a bit more, bring down the saturation a bit more, and give it more of that silver tone. So I've just been tweaking little things, maybe moving lights around and messing with the texture. Things I don't really want to leave within the tutorial because you'll feel pressure to follow it, and it's not something I'm telling you is best to do for the kind of result of learning of the image. It's just me being an artist and tweaking, and I'm sure you should be inclined to do the same thing throughout the tutorial. But coming into the camera here, I was thinking as I was like lighting things then, I was like, this is kind of at the point where messing with the lighting isn't gonna give me the satisfaction that I'm fixated on getting right now by making improvements and changes. And sometimes you can feel like you need to make a change and you don't know what. Sometimes it can be good to kind of pivot your attention away from specific parameters, and you know, maybe mess with your gamma and contrast or something. And I think you'll often find that it can sometimes give you what you're looking for. I'm going to pop in a LUT here, one of the GSG ones, gallery photo. I tend to use this on quite a lot of my images because it gives it an early punch, pre-grade. I think because of this LUT, I don't really grade much anymore. But I'm going to pop that on there and give my image that kind of pop that I was seeking before I move forward. Okay, so we'll pop into Bridge, and within my purchased assets, if we go to 3D plants, that's not purchased, 3D plants. These are kind of a lot of the ones I was using. I'm quite bad at using color, like not the greatest at it at all. On some occasions, I would use forest or grass for the grass. But I'm going to try and keep it to Megascan's assets to not leach outside of this too much and make you go around different places. Maybe I'll have another chapter at the end where I trade a few. But we're going to stick on this for now. Wild grass. I'm sure you can find a lot of different grass on here. I'm going to bring this into the scene. And I'm going to show you a decent way of laying this out. So they're all going to come in like this. If you just Alt-G that. We'll call it Megascans. Again, sorry about my keyboard. And then we'll group that. We'll call it grass. I'll pause this for now. And then just, you know, pull these way out of your scene. And then I found that a pretty quick way of doing this is to just kind of grab the assets in the viewport and start moving them over into a line. Right, and then once that's done, you should have everything kind of laid out here. I probably have my textures. No, they're on. The light will just be. And then once they're all in a line, you can kind of see which ones you want to use. You see we've kind of got some decent clumped ones here, some taller ones, smaller ones. So I think it would be good to use a kind of decent variation of these. I'm going to start off with this kind of medium-sized patch. So I'm going to drop in an Octane scatter. I'm not going to duplicate it, I'm just going to use that patch there. I'm going to press F1. We'll switch this to surface, come into our geo, and drag this into the surface. Start Octane. Okay, cool. It's immediately covered in grass, and it looks great. So that's nice. Now you can stop here if you want, if you enjoy that. Who knows? Now what I'm going to do is, I'm just trying to think, do I want to scale this with a random effector, or do I want to scale the asset itself? Drop in a random, and then you have to, even though if you parent it by holding Alt like I did, I'm sorry I did that really quick. I think it's good to have it under the same kind of parental tree anyway. I'm going to turn off the position, but I'm going to do -1 on the scale. Yeah, no. I'm going to keep -1, but I'm going to just press T. I'm just dragging across the screen. I'm going to scale this asset way down. I think it can be good to mess with the scales here. So you see how does this look without? Yeah, in fact, I'll leave that off for now. It can be interesting. I kind of like going for the smaller scale. Once we put the noise in the scale distribution, it adds a bit more weight. I'm going to clock an extra 0 in there. That's going to fill that back up again. But then in the random, I'm going to add like, I don't know, 700 on the H. And that's going to stop giving you those repetitions that your eye might begin to spot. Might even just give a parameter of 1 on each of the random positions there. I might even give a parameter of 1 on all the positions. Now here's where the juicy stuff starts. So before we get too far into this, I'm going to drop in another asset to go with it. So maybe this one, a taller one. Scale him down. maybe a tall one like this. And we'll scale him down. The key to getting a render that's going to be quite striking here is minute variations that add a... You've heard me probably in all tutorials speak about hinting at detail. This is kind of a version of that, where combining all these assets together give an illusion of there being a lot more detail, or maybe one more kind of grand complex asset. Anyway, come into your scale and add in a noise. We'll change this to... I'm trying to think what one I used often. We start with Ober. I tend to go for Ober a lot. And then maybe increase the scale to about 500. And the low clip and the high clip, if you just bring them really, really close together, we're going to start getting really kind of nice separations here. Now, this again, immediately we enter into the territory of messing with things endlessly. I'm going to try and reduce the contrast a bit between them. And I'm not sure I'm entirely happy with the scale of everything right now. So I might just turn this random back on and increase my distribution. Sometimes it can be good to just start flicking through seeds until you find something that you like. I'll turn that back off again. Again, this can be a part of the tutorial that becomes quite difficult for both of us, as I just play here until I find something that I think looks good. Maybe I'll change this to turbulence. I think that suits it a little bit better for this rock surface particularly. If you're going for your own rock, you might indeed find that using different noises works better on the kind of structure that you've got there. It can genuinely be quite difficult to find what you like. Especially if you like the rock before adding any foliage and get it to a place you like, you can feel yourself slightly latching towards the visual style that you laid on the rock without any of that. So I'm just going to maybe change a couple lights here and then see how that affects us now. Before I start diving into adding way more assets, I'm just going to duplicate that. Maybe see how it looks on this side. I'm going to delete that light and just maybe try two big ones. And I'm going to mess with the seed again. Okay. I like this. As you can see, it can take sometimes almost torturous tweaking, you know, to get this to somewhere you like. Maybe decrease the power of this secondary light. Bring them together. I can often be quite harsh on using one light source, and then I'll come back into that a little bit later. So now we have kind of one scatter set up. Now, if we call this grass, we'll call this grass random. And in fact, let's detach that random there and put this in a group and call it random. And then we'll open up these, make sure this is all open. I've just noticed. You can see the grass being ever so slightly lifted off here by the random. If you just zero out the 1 and the Y there, that'll sort that. Now you'll see why I've done this a little bit later, but what we're going to do for now is duplicate this scatter, delete the assets within it, and we'll turn it off. And we'll go and look for another kind of leaf we want to use. So now I'm probably going to find things that are a little bit bigger than grass but more scarce. So we're not going to do something as dense, but we're going to kind of maybe go for a little bit more scale within it. So I'm just kind of looking here. The cat palms are nice. The thatching grass is nice. So are the archangels. I think I'm tempted to use some of the climbers here. But I've been using the ferns a lot, so I think I'm going to stay on that wave right now. And we'll just drag these over with our assets. And thankfully we only have 3. And we'll call this fern. Drop that in there. Now, I'm just going to maybe take that small one. I'm going to pop that in here. Turn this scatter on. And I'm going to come down back to like 1,000. Maybe less even. 500. And then duplicate the random. And drag it in there and turn off the first random. Maybe do -2. And we'll scale down the asset quite a massive amount. Now before we do any more tweaks, I'm going to come into the node editor and I'm going to mess with the texture slightly. So in the color, I want the green to kind of have a slight more similarity to the rest of the scene. So that could often be messing with the hue. I find that bumping that almost fixes it straight away. It can also be things like messing with the gamut of the roughness to get a shine that you want or to take away a shine that you're not keen on. So I think from here, if we come into the distribution of the noise, what's good about this now is we can kind of increase this and have it bleed onto areas, which creates just a more detailed look overall. You know, can maybe change the scale a little bit to like 450, and the noise, if you want to, you can change the seed completely. I think sometimes that can be quite a great addition, but I also think it's good to keep the seed the same, and like I said, just change these kind of parameters that are controlling the boundaries and allow it to kind of populate different areas. I think that can come out really nice. But I'm still finding this fern material to be just a little bit washed out compared to everything else, so I'm maybe going to bump up the saturation. Okay, there we go. Just took a few little tweaks, and that's going to put me in a position that I quite like. I bring down the gamma just a tad more. Maybe get 1.3 there. Okay. And then we will, although we're going to put other assets in there, see what other ones we can do. Now I'm going to do this a little bit quicker now. I've tried to keep a slight pause back as I've been adding things in. But I'm going to start doing this a little bit quicker now that you've seen the process. So I'm going to drop these bog march craft. Let's not bother with that. So I'm going to group them and drag them over, spread them out, think I really like this one with that kind of like curl there. So I'm going to drop that into that fern scatter, scale him down. That looks cool. I'm going to mess with the material because this is something I should have mentioned on the fern. It was like way too light going through him, like way too much light passing through him right now. Especially just because of the power of my lights. So just bumping up the gamma on that translucency into the transmission kind of dodges that effect. And then, what was he called? Jesus Christ. Bog. Okay. Call him Bog. And then we'll go back into the bridge. I kind of want some flowers now. Something, you know, so I'll add some lily turfs. Put a little bit of color in there. Come on. It's called Sketchy Visuals for a reason. And drag him out. Start spreading them out. Okay. I think I'll go for maybe this one. Pop him in there. In fact, maybe not, because there's not as much color in that as I thought there might be. Okay, that's better. Scale him down. And then I'm going to come into that material. Find the color correction. And bump up the saturation there. Not really seeing the color I wanted to see, but oh well. Maybe I'll just drop in another one. No, I'll leave that. I'm going to delete them out of the scene because I don't think I'll come back to them besides the one I used. Maybe we'll take a look at these crown beard sunflowers now. That's what I'm going to call them, sunflowers. Just press F2. Bring them out here. Just to save time at this point, probably just going to grab one and scale it without laying them out in the scene. Okay. Now I think what I want to do here before I do that, I'm going to bring him back out. I'm going to duplicate this fern. I'm going to call it flower. Now the reason I'm doing that is because at this point it's beginning, and I'm going to actually, just going to delete those. It's when you bring new assets into the scatter, it starts to place them in spaces already got other assets, and it begins to get to the point where you don't really have much of any of them. So that's where kind of the stacking comes in really useful. So I'm going to take that flower and I'm going to actually put him in the new one, mainly because I liked a lot of these, the ones that had too much transmission. Was it the bog? And as you can see now, that's immediately kind of planting more pink in there. So with that sunflower, I'm going to pop him back in there now too. And then I can even maybe, at that point, bring up the amount that we have as well. Again, this just gives you more controls. And you can see now we're kind of getting to a point where there's a really, really lush amount of variation. And it just begins to get a very united look almost. And you can keep pushing this farther and farther. There's a lot of different assets I used to use. I even, on a couple, would bring in fact. Now quickly, I'm just gonna group these, call them sunflower. I would even mess with maybe bringing in For example here, press F1 and I'm just going to pull one out here. Maybe get a different one. Delete the rest. I would even have a little play with, and I only did this on one or two of the ones I did. But I don't really want to hide the fact that I did this. I would play with hand placing them to create these kind of effects. And I think this is something that is good. As much as a procedural technique is great, sometimes you can finesse things. So I'm going to get rid of this translucency. I'm going to bump the saturation, change the hue a little bit, and kind of get out of these yellow tones, change the gamma. That's really the translucency though, being a bit annoying. Change the roughness slightly. Bypass that ambient occlusion multiply. There we go, it's starting to fit in a bit now. That was a difficult one. Even so, it's still not. It's a really difficult texture. I think it's all this though. As great as a procedural technique can be, sometimes hand placing these is just going to give you a level of finesse that adds to the elusive infinite detail that your image might have. I think the only thing I'm not enjoying is the kind of grass that's around those pink ones that I added in. So the lily turf. Just maybe tweak that a little bit. Okay. So I'm going to close up these. Ivy. Throw that in there. Now you can keep stacking these, you can keep adding them. I think for the sake of the tutorial, I'm not really going to take it any farther. I think I'm just going to explore one last chapter of adding a mask controller over these with effectors. And seeing what we can do with. Okay, so a little lesson on takes if you've never used them. If you just come below the objects and take manager, I'm just going to hit this button twice. And I'm just going to call this 001 and I'm going to call this 002. Now in 002, I'm just going to hit this blue button there. If we turn off this ivy for now. Now here we're going to do something juicy. So if you look at the way in fact I'll do it with the way it is right now. Let's go to MoGraph, Effector, and Plane. Now, what we're going to do, in your 3 Octane scatters, or however many you have, in the Effectors channel, drop the same plane in all of them. Okay? Now, it's currently exploded everything, but we don't want that. So, turn off the position, turn on scale, turn on uniform scale and absolute scale, change this to -1. It's going to completely get rid of everything. Pretty magical, right? Come to fall off. Let's drop in a spherical field. Now we have something that can control where it is. Now, it's not going to work exactly like that. Currently it's controlling where it isn't, which I don't want. I want it to control where it is. So just add on where this it says clamp here. Just want to add an invert. I do miss the old fields, I'm not going to lie. It's much better. Now you can see that we can have it at the top of the rock like that. Can move it down. Have it at the bottom. You can have it shifting. I'll turn on both GPUs so that goes quicker. Pretty cool. Right. See, I could have that settle in at the top there. have it just kind of on the left side, just on the bottom. You can duplicate the fields as well. So if we wanted it up the top there, and we wanted to add another field, move that down. Could have it at the top and the bottom. Seriously, super simple setup, but also a very advanced move to do if you're a beginner. Like seriously, quite advanced, and I think being able to leverage things like this for speed and animation and doing all sorts of stuff is great. Now on top of that main controller, you can see if we snap back here, we go back to that old one. So I'm going to leave this tutorial here, and thank you for sticking by me in the hiatus. If you've seen my tutorials in the past, I spent almost all of last year just caught up in freelance projects, and it feels good to be back to doing this again, and I hope it brings you immense value. Even if you're an advanced user and you just want to pull a tiny little part from somewhere in my workflow, then I hope it helps you. As usual, all the assets featured in this tutorial will be on my store. And with that being said, I will see you in the next tutorial.